Hey, everybody, and welcome to this little special mini Let's Talk Broncos. I'm here with Ryan Edwards, 850 KOA's own. You can find him on the Sports Zoo from 3 to 6. Ryan, how are you doing, man? And yeah, let's start there. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I appreciate the invite. Certainly kind of got tagged into an invite, but I appreciate that you bringing me into it. And yeah, let's talk about George Paton. Let's talk about the Broncos. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we've got some different takes here, but first, I think I'll ask you about something we probably agree on. Let's start off with some niceties first. How are you feeling about the Patrick Surtain contract? Seeing that come down. I think we even know the structure of it now. How do you feel about that? Is it in line with what you were expecting?
It was, and I think the way that they've approached this, the way he's approached this whole time has been the right way, right? And it's not to say that what Jamar Chase or Brandon Ayuk or anybody else, CD Lamb, have done to hold out has been wrong. It's just he's been there every day. I mean, you've been out there, right? He's out there every OTAs, training camp. He's out there, and you didn't hear a peep out of him. Every time he was asked about it, said, "I'm not really worried about it. It's going to take care of itself." He had 2 years left on his deal, kind of like Jamar Chase does. And he just showed up every single day. He knew he was going to be the highest paid cornerback. The Broncos made him the highest paid cornerback. And I think the added bonus on this is they added years to what was already the 2 year deal that was established. So he's here for 6 years. And I think that for me is the part that's like really like eye opening and exciting because so many times you hear about players where they're almost trying to shorten the contract because they want to get back into free agency. They want to get back into being able to earn. And I don't blame them. That's their right. They should do that. But at the same time, he's a cornerstone player for this team, and he just wants to go to work. And I think again, kind of part of the reason why I sent out the George Paton tweet yesterday is almost in response to that. It's like, hey man, there was a lot of heat on George for not taking the quarterback. There was a lot of heat for Micah Parsons, for example, not taking him either there at pick number 9. You chose Pat Surtain, and he has done nothing but prove that he was not only worth the pick, but he's going to be one of the best Broncos of all time.
Yeah, and I think you're dead on there. The pick looks like a tremendous hit now. I'll even say that as someone who's in the Fields camp. It doesn't look like that would have worked out. Um, uh, uh, yeah, it looks like a tremendous hit. None of the quarterbacks really worked out outside of maybe Trevor Lawrence.
Right.
But even then, you're talking middling quarterback versus best corner in the league, and it's at least a discussion. I think you have a lot of good points there. One thing that really excites me with it is the length of it, going all the way through 2029, but
Yep.
it's not hitting the Broncos, I think, in a substantial way until those years. We see a spike in, I think, 2026 or 2027, I believe, where it gets over 20 for the first time. But it doesn't get to like 29 million until we're in 2027, 2026 or 2020, or sorry, 2028 or 2029
Yeah.
rather.
Right.
Um, and then at that point, who knows where the cap's going to be? It might be at $400 million,
Right.
and that's pennies. I think one thing I will say before I get into my George Paton slander, I think the philosophy of paying players early is the way to go. I think the Eagles have
Agreed.
established that, and if you show that you're willing to pay players early, I feel like they're willing to your point, take a longer deal like Sertan, because I'm not worried about, oh, I got to hit the market in 3-4 years so I can, renegotiate, up my deal. I know the Broncos are down to negotiate with me early if I'm doing my job. So I don't have to wait until 2029 to maybe get that pay raise. I can renegotiate them with them in 2027, and every side is winning that way. Sertain's getting a lot of guaranteed money. The Broncos have built-in protection. I feel like this is a win-win-win for just all sides involved.
100%. Plus, it's a message you're sending to your current locker room and future locker rooms too. I mean, he's a cornerstone player for the franchise. He's a cornerstone player in the locker room. He's a captain for you. You took care of him, and yeah, and basically you say, hey, you play well for the Broncos, and you will be rewarded. And they didn't make him hold out or even get to next year. And that was something we talked about a bit in the offseason. Is like, okay, well, it sounds like he's going to play this year, but then will he feel as good about playing on the or the 5th year option? Right? And we didn't have to worry about that. And you shouldn't have to worry about that. You're right. Paying him early, getting it done, the message it sends, the stability you send there. I think the same thing with Quinn Miners. I mean, it's the same kind of deal. It's like locking in guys that you believe are cornerstone players. doing it when you don't necessarily have to, but it makes sense for everybody. And there's a better feeling about not only those players, but about the stability of the team, because that's been a problem for the Broncos for the last several years, right? Stability. And a lot of it comes, again, I know we'll get into the George Paton stuff, but a lot of it comes to like, my thought on George is like, what would we be viewing George Paton if he would have had stability from the very beginning with ownership, right? If he wouldn't have been placed in that position where he has to go hire the head coach. Now I know where you're going to go with, you're like, wow, the GM should be in the meeting and all that. That's fine. We can get into that. But I think that there's a certain amount of, you see what happens when you have a direction. You see what happens when you have a plan and stability. And those are the things that the Broncos are building off of. This is the first time in a while, and maybe you agree with this or not, but it's the first time in a while I felt really like they know where they're going, and you can actually see where they're going. This isn't a bunch of band-aids. This isn't a bunch of, well, let's see how this works and sticks against the wall this year. You know, John Elway was famous for that for so many years after the Super Bowl. Like, hey, we're going to throw some stuff against the wall. Let's see if we can rekindle something somehow, right? That's not what this is. There's youth on this team, but it's youth that's building towards a direction, and I think it's pretty exciting.
There, I agree with you. I think where this team is headed is just tremendously exciting. I am curious, though, how large do you think the impact, you alluded to it some, one of the things we were talking about yesterday was this idea of, you know, George Paton not being in the interview for Sean Payton. I'm curious, what do you think the dynamics are in that front office right now? Between those two, who's the ultimate shot caller? And then, of course, we also had the Athletic quote come out, you know, talking about how, let me get it exactly right here, a source inside the league, anonymous source to be fair, but a source inside the league said there's dysfunction between the GM and the coach over who is calling the shots. Somehow Sean has wrestled control away from George Paton. I'm just curious what you think about that whole dynamic right now.
I think that's a little bit hyperbolic, but I understand where the sentiment's coming from, because when Sean got here, there was an immediate kind of reshuffling of the balance of power, and the new ownership, they kind of wanted that. They wanted to have a different kind of checks and balances, if you will, and they reorganized the structure, right? I mean, Sean's not reporting to George. Sean's reporting to ownership, and there are some teams where it's the other way, the other way around, where the coach reports to the GM. But in this case, they said, no, we want everything going to the ownership, and we'll be in charge of that, which is actually, kind of a good thing. But Sean brings so much gravitas. He brings so much experience, and that winning experience, I think, means a lot to the ownership. I mean, it's one of those deals like you're in on Sean Payton, right? I mean, not only because of the contract, but you're into the direction. Like, you kind of have to be. And especially now that you've shown, hey, we're willing to move on from Russell Wilson and have the biggest dead cap in the history of the league, the ownership is in. So for me, it's like, you got to let him do it the way he wants to try to do it. Now, is there a sense maybe George is along for the ride? I don't know if it's exactly like that, but I think it's more just saying, well, George, this is what we think you're really good at. We think you're really good at identifying talent. And we think that if we have continuity at coaching, we have continuity with ownership, that you can really thrive under those circumstances. George will do his few press conferences, but for the most part, he's kind of a nerd, right? I mean, he's a football nerd. And honestly, that's kind of the new dynamic with most GMs, right? There are a few GMs like John Lynch, for example, that are former players, but a lot of them are former scouts. Like that's kind of the dynamic now is, you have your head coach who's probably an offensive-minded coach. Most of the league is now turning to that. And then you have your GM who's a former scout or in that lineage. So I guess, to go back to the quote, it's not shocking at all. Again, it feels a little bit unfair, but I'd say that most people view it as Sean probably carries a little more power inside the building than George does. But I don't necessarily think that is a bad thing, because Mickey Loomis, I don't think ever carried as much power as Sean Payton did with the Saints, and they functioned just fine. And in fact, Sean really loved the fact that Mickey thought about things differently than he did. And I think that dynamic exists with these two as well. But make no mistake about it, the ownership wanted to come in. They wanted to settle things in a way where they showed they were in control. And they did that by arranging the power dynamic the way it is, for a reason.
Yeah, totally. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either. I mean, the Chiefs have that power
Yep.
structure. The Rams, the 49ers, the best era in Broncos history, the last NFL dynasty with the Patriots. Like
Yep.
it's certainly a way that you can have success. I do think when we're litigating the George Paton of it all, that the fact that he goes from, I mean, you said it yourself. There was a little restructuring of power. And some of that's the new ownership. But when they come in, I think they empowered him to give Russ that new deal
They did.
and everything. So I think he had a lot of power, was the ultimate shot caller, was entrusted to make the Nate Hackett hire and whatnot. And then I think after that 2022 season, where Russ Wilson goes so bad, Nate Hackett goes so bad, you don't have George Paton in the interview. To me, I think that is like a tamping down of power. Nonetheless, I think to your point, that might be right. I think my favorite thing about George Paton is his drafting. I take some umbrage with it. We'll get into that too. But like I think my big issues with him were I guess the Nate Hackett hire, and then I didn't love his contracts, but I think those have gotten a lot better. Like the Quinn Miners one is ridiculous. I don't know how they got away with paying him less than Robert Hunt.
Right.
So yeah, I guess yeah. Where are you at with the drafting from George Paton? Are you feeling good there?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about this before I came on with you because when I mean again, you sort of tipped your hand a little bit about what you thought about him via Twitter, and of course I watch Let's Talk Broncos, so I know a little bit of where you lean on this. But yeah, the thing about it is I feel like you could say, hey, the last two draft classes, obviously Sean had his hands in those, and it makes sense that those guys are on the roster, right? But the fact that you had five guys from his very first draft, which was Vic Fangio's draft, you have four guys from the next draft where you didn't have a first rounder, right? You had Nick Benito, you had Greg Dulcich, for example, and you had Damari Mathis. I mean, guys that ostensibly are on the 53, a couple of guys that are not currently because of other short-term IR or PUP, and that was kind of the point I was making a little bit yesterday. I know you and I had back and forth because you talked about draft whiffs because of injury. Those aren't whiffs necessarily; they're guys that would have made the roster. But my point of it is that those guys would have been broomed out of here if Sean didn't like them. If Sean didn't see value in them, there's nothing tying. And we see this with every team. This isn't even just unique to the Broncos. This is unique to this is the same thing with every team. You get a new coach in there, even especially new ownership in there, and they're not tied to those players, right? They're not tied to any of the coaches that came before them. They don't care about any of that stuff. But the fact is that Sean sees value in those players. And to the point, if we're talking about power dynamics, Sean signed off on extending both of those players that were part of that 2021 class. So I'm not intentionally trying to sound like I'm reaching because I know that what that it looks like. And there's a lot of people that hit me with the state sponsored stuff yesterday, which is just absolutely nonsense. I just thought about it in the moment of like, hey, Quinn Miners got extended, Pat Surtain got extended. And before those two contracts happened, I was saying months ago, we haven't seen Sean keep anybody really that George brought in, free agents especially. But we'd seen Sean kind of move on from guys, Justin Simmons, for example, right? You've seen Sean kind of like after he got his feet settled under him, he was like, yeah, we don't need this guy. I'm good. But the fact is they've kept quite a few of those draft picks. I mean, that's 9 guys in the 53 from those two draft classes right now. And that's not including Damari Mathis, who's going to eventually come back. That's not including Henningsen, who's on the practice squad, right? Drew Sanders, of course, last year, but he's going to come back too. But that's Sean Payton's class. But the point of it is it's just he would have easily moved on from all those players if he didn't believe in them. But for me, it's an earmark that he does believe in them, and I think that needs to be noted. That's all.
No, I think that's a fair point. I think the extension is a huge validator of that. I ultimately agree with you on the rostering point too. I would say just to be a little difficult. I think that part of it is also they have so much dead cap, and some of those George Paton ads are guys on rookie deals, and you need guys on rookie deals right now.
Absolutely.
Nonetheless,
that's very fair. That's very fair.
You don't need one of the highest paid guards in the league. You don't need one of the highest paid boundary corners in the league. When that is a position that I think a lot of people believe, the reason the corners market hasn't shot up much is you don't maybe need the high end guy. If Sean Payton wanted to, he could maybe swap a Patrick Surtain for a bunch of assets and get this rebuild going. So I definitely agree with you there. I think this does validate Payton some. I guess this is my thing with George Paton. I even brought my chart I made in February for this for you, Ryan. I'll get the Let's Talk Broncos.
Oh my God, this is great. All right, hit me with it.
I came prepared. So this is now you can see some massive hits here. Jonathan Cooper. This is all using approximate value. It's a Pro Football Reference metric. It's very flawed, but it is the only metric that I know applies to every position. And I think it's a solid estimator. Gets us in the ballpark at least. Surtain, I think, is an interesting one because it's like it barely registers as a hit if you don't compare it to the other corners. Yeah. Just because the top end of that class is so ridiculously loaded. Generally, though, he's had some massive hits like Henningsen sticking around. You highlighted him. That's like way more than you expect out of a 6th round pick. Jonathan Cooper, Nick Benito, and some of these register as misses right now, but I think will end up being hits like Dulcich and Benito. And then Baron Browning's a big hit. That whole 2021 class looks like big hits, save for Javonte Williams' knee injury, which I pushed back a little on the injury thing because like a Caden Stearns and a Jamar Johnson had the issues in college, but Javonte, I don't really blame him for that one. So I don't know. I agree with you some. I also think where I would push back is I think he ultimately lands somewhere in the middle. I think if you wanted to say he's a little above average, that's fair. I might lean to he's a little below average or average, but I don't know if I'd split hairs on that.
Right.
My argument
sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that we're on the same page, right? I mean, I think that's where I feel like some of the discourse, and this is why I wanted to pop on today, because some of the discourse becomes so dug in on one side or the other, and it's all hyperbole, right? We're probably in the same ballpark. It's a glass half full, glass half empty kind of thing, right? Where it's like, well, gosh, I think he could be considered a top half of the league GM, but you know what? People will always be able to come back with the wins, right? Hey, they haven't really won a lot. And how much is his responsibility to that? I brought up the 3 different head coaches in 4 years. Well, guess what? He's very responsible for that reason, right? I mean, he fired Vic Fangio. He hired Nate Hackett, which was a disaster. And then, of course, the trade for Russell Wilson, which, by the way, again, a lot of people supported at the time. Mm-hmm. The extension was part of it. So you can't really have one or the other. Like, he shouldn't have extended it. Well, okay, well, we know that now, but that was part of the deal. You knew you were extending him when you traded for him. But the point of it is like, yeah, he's had his misses. And I think that, there are some GMs that are considered the best in the league. They still have their misses. Maybe it's not to your Graf's point. Maybe there's more hits. But I'd say some of that for me is developing a long-term culture. Like, what are the Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Kansas City Chiefs now, the New England Patriots for a long time? They're best known for a certain type of player, a personality, a certain type of build, athleticism, those kinds of things. The Broncos haven't had that kind of continuity for forever. I mean, it's been really since the Super Bowl years with John Elway, right? Then you kind of had a sense of what they were trying to do, and that was because they had Peyton Manning in the building. But since then, it's been an amalgamation of different coaching philosophies and to a certain extent different GM philosophies. So it's really hard to build off that. But I think that those are great graphs, and they do illustrate a point about how they're really not like, because somebody hit me back yesterday with league wide, this team is viewed like the roster talent is below league average, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think they're going to surprise some people this year, but I understand the point. Like, if you're keeping players here on what is considered a bad team, are they really like hits, right? It's like, well, they're hits in comparison to what you have available to you, right? And you certainly didn't have your premium draft picks because you sent them away for Russell Wilson, which, again, a problem you caused, but you had to work around still to that extent. So I just think that those are all valid, nuanced takes in this entire conversation, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I agree. I think he's ultimately fairly middling. I think he's had plenty of misses outside the 2 obvious ones, and lots of his hits outside the the two obvious misses. So I think outside of those two bungles, the Russell Wilson deal, the Nate Hackett deal,
And
I think
Randy Gregory too. Got to
oh, Gregory, yeah, that's a good point. I was overlooking that one. Yeah, outside of those three bad ones, but even that one looked okay. But yeah, the injuries part of it, I guess you got to factor in there. Yeah, outside of those three misses, I think he's kind of middling. The problem is you have those three really bad misses. And I guess where I was going initially, my one argument would be, because I do agree, he's probably a fine drafter. If you look at like what the Vikings and Browns have done these past 2 years, GM groups for front offices that are pretty praised, they have like no hits in those classes at all. So I think he's a fine drafter, but my one concern is if they have limited his role to, hey, George, buddy, just be our drafter for us. We've got people to even help you with contracts now. We've got this new power structure. We just need you to kill the draft for us. And he's ultimately just fine at drafting. Is that still disappointing ultimately?
Yeah, I think it's, believe it or not, I think it's too early to say that. And the reason is because he's going to have Sean here for a while, right? So we have 2 years of George with Sean. You got so many years of Mickey Loomis and Sean working together. And boy, it wasn't until, was it 2017 that they had that just massive haul and draft picks with Lattimore and Alvin Kamara. And I mean, they just hit up and down that entire group, but they had been together for a long time up to that point. So it's not to say that that's like coming as soon as 2025, but they do have their full complement of draft picks coming up. And that's the first time in a long time that they have that. So believe it or not, even though we're only 4 years into his tenure here, I think we're really only 2 years into knowing what he's capable of, and I think it's too early to tell. But again, it's so tough because we live in a world, especially, but in the NFL, right, where if it's not working right now, there's plenty of people behind you that can probably do the job, maybe even do it better. And we talk about it all the time, next man up, right, all the time. In coaching, it doesn't matter. Players, it's all the same. Same thing with GMs. So where you're pointing out some things, I'm saying, well, the mitigating circumstances of, well, what Vic Fangio wants or what Nathaniel Hackett wants, and now what Sean Payton wants. I think that did play a bit of a factor in the fact that you're able to keep those players and not have to completely reset those 2 years of draft picks between Fangio's draft and Hackett's draft, that you're able to keep. I mean, again, 9 players currently on the 53-man roster, 2 of them that just got extended, says a lot about the direction that they're going. And so I was saying any hits in that time should be viewed as pretty valuable. And now let's see what they can do with their future going forward, building off the 2 years that they're together.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. It definitely matters. You look at Vic Fangio, or John Elway, rather. Everyone talks about how towards the end his classes got a little better. Well, he had great position coaches around. And then if we were to look at George Paton, 2021 class looks pretty good. 2022 class is a big step back with like the Montrell Washington pick and some of those. Nate Hackett and co. Obviously, Stooks pounded the table for Montrell, and then 2023 looks better already. So again, I know we're already well over our time, so thank you so much, Ryan, for joining me. Please shout out anything you have to shout out, and yeah, thanks again.
Well, I want to shout out, first of all, Let's Talk Broncos. Big fan. Always appreciate when you guys have me on. But yeah, no, man, I'm excited to get the season started. Certainly, can't wait to take the post-game reaction stuff. It's one of my favorite parts of the gig, doing the post-game Broncos react on KOA. So that, plus, of course, KOA Sports with Alan Dave is always a blast. And we've got a lot of fun things coming up for football season. We'll have Rod Smith back on. We'll have Pat Surtain on weekly. We have a weekly Broncos player on Thursdays. That's a rotating player. So all sorts of fun stuff coming up. But I know you guys are as well. So keep up the good work, man.
Well, thank you. Have you shared a pick for the game yet? I don't want to steal.
I have not, but again, the one thing that I feel like is going to be fascinating to watch, right? Because we all know Sean's got a lot riding on this. He's got a lot riding on Bo Nix. I think he's going to be set up in a way where he's going to have some quick reads, some stuff to get the ball out of his hands really quick, and maybe the running backs, maybe it's going to be tight end, maybe it's going to be some quick, some hook routes, stuff that's really that he can just see. He can see the field. I don't know how much Mike McDonald's going to be running blitzes at him. Al and I were getting into that yesterday. he was sort of talking about, he's like with rookies, you don't really want to blitz them. What you want to do is you want to confuse them after the snap. Is you want to make it difficult. You want to limit the throwing lanes, because if you blitz, well, then they're trained to just throw where the blitz is. They're just going to throw right over the head of the blitzer. He's like, but I think for Mike McDonald, this first game, what he's going to try to do is he's going to try to confuse them. And I was like, okay, that'll be interesting. I think Sean, with his experience, is going to kind of prepare Bo for a lot of different scenarios, and he seems like the kind of guy that processes it pretty quick. So back to your original question, I really do like the Broncos. I mean, at least like the Broncos to cover the 6 points that it's ballooned to. But man, I just got this feeling like they're going to surprise some people. The offense is going to be ahead of schedule. They feel like they're ahead of schedule. How's the defense going to look against the Seahawks offense, which is not going to be the Pete Carroll historical, hey, we're just going to try to run the ball and control the clock. They're going to be taking some shots with Ryan Grubb. So I think this has some sneaky shootout potential, but I kind of like the Broncos in a close one in the late fourth quarter.
I like it, Ryan. Well, thank you very much. Everyone, go make sure you're checking out Ryan for the post-game recap. And again, Sports Zoo, Monday through Friday, 3 to 6 on KOA. Ryan, thanks again. And yeah, thanks for joining the show. Have a good day.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.